Okay, so welcome back to the, I think it's number 6 video in this VRay Basic series from Render School. This video is going to be about just an introduction to arbitrary outputs or render elements or AOVs or whatever you want to call them. Basically, just outputs that aren't just the RGB as we're seeing here. Um, we're all used to having the alpha, but there's a lot more stuff you can get out of it. So that's what we'll be looking at in this video, and I will try and keep it somewhat short because I tend to say that I want to do stuff quickly and then it takes forever, and I apologize. I have this Stanford Buddha model here, and I've just put a quick, very dark material, V-Ray material on him. Added quite a bit of reflection. I've split up the highlights and reflection glossiness, so our specular highlights are sharper than our reflections. Turn on Fresnel. I'm just going with the 1.6, and I think that's all I've done. I'm going to get into this in next video or the video after, but I'm using environment overrides just because I like to have my VRay Light Dome use a low resolution HDR and then grab the reflections from a high res one. And I might have gone a little bit overboard with this guy, being as the uh, the HDR I'm using for reflections and stuff like that is about 500 megs. So yeah, you know, that's probably a tad overboard, but it looks nice. So uh, more than just the dome light, I've got a spherical light in here, and that's all for demonstration purposes, so that will make sense in a short while. But why do we even want to render out all these arbitraries or whatever your system calls them? They're called render elements in VRay. Basically because we want to be able to put the whole thing together and control stuff better inside of our compositing package, such as Nuke. And I differentiate between two kinds of arbitraries. One is the ones we use for beauty, which basically, when added together, will result in the beauty render. And then there's the technical ones, which is stuff you use for relighting, masking, uh, I don't know, depth of field, all that stuff that's it doesn't have anything to do with how this stuff looks, but it's something you can use afterwards in Nuke, and that's something we're definitely going to focus on later in some video. But for now, let's just see the VRay part of it. So we jump into our render settings and render elements, this tab, and right off the bat we have a lot of stuff to choose from. I want to make sure that we can rebuild a beauty pass out of this and control some of the elements. Also, this is really good for troubleshooting, figuring out where's my flicker coming from, where's that blue color, whatever. Actually, there's one thing I need to do before I drive myself insane. I downloaded these guys as OBJ files from the internet, and they have this tendency to not be visible in reflections and refractions. Um, I just needed to do that for my own sanity. So to recreate our beauty, we need reflection, refraction, self-illumination. We actually don't need the shadow per se. We need the specular, we need the lighting, we need the GI. Um, in this case, we don't need the caustics. We could if we were actually doing that stuff. But let's get the shadow out as well, just in case, and actually diffuse just so we can see in an easier way what it is that we're doing. So I'm going to hit render, And with what we have now, it's all stuff that's being rendered anyways, so it's really not going to give us a performance hit, but it is going to take a bit more memory, um, basically because it's multiple images that have to be held in memory at the same time. So while it's nice to just turn on all sorts of stuff, also bear in mind, especially in heavier scenes, that it will take a toll on your memory. But let's see what we have now. We've got here in the VRay frame buffer, we had RGB color and alpha, but now we have a lot more stuff to select. So I'm going to choose reflect, which shows our pure reflection, the reflection that goes into this guy. Refraction we don't have yet, because we don't have anything refracting in there. Self-illumination, self-illumination and lights or shaders or what have we, it's going to be in here. Specula, it's just a couple of little dots in here. We'll make that more obvious in a second. Lighting is all of our direct lights, so that's the dome light and the spherical light, but with no specs, no reflections, no fanciness, just the lighting. GI is our GI solution, and that's our shadow. And I know this looks weird, but in reality, what you want to do is like the yeah, it just looks weird, and you need to go with that. But what you want to do is just add that on top of your all the other layers together, and you'll have your shadow. And diffuse is basically just the colors, and we don't really need this to rebuild. I just want to see what it looked like. So we actually get rid of that again. But the trick is if you take all of these guys and take them into Nuke and just merge all of them together using plus, you'll get this. With one exception, actually. I'll just remove this guy. I didn't have the background in there, and usually I don't think you'll want that in there, but if I have to actually be honest and say we're rebuilding this whole thing, I need to get that in there as well. So those are the passes we need for rebuilding our beauty render. And let me just show you, I have another Buddha in here. This guy is basically just refractive glass like. Oh, while we're at it, I just want to make sure our specs get a little bit more obvious. So we'll just pull them out like this and hit render. And it's loading up that big HDR file. Oops. There comes a Facebook message. But yeah, you see this guy is all glass and such. So we should be able to see him in the refraction render element. And we will in just a second. While we're at it, you can see that we're actually getting a little bit of, in the last class we talked about using GI for caustics. We're getting a little bit of that in here. Just a little side note. But that's our refraction. Self-illumination, specular, see they got a little bit bigger now, so you can actually see them. Lighting, pure GI, shadows, and the background. So all this stuff, drag it all into the same merge node instead of nuke, set it to plus, and you will get this image. So that's like the beauty reconstruction render elements. But there's a couple more that I just wanna show you guys. I'm not gonna go through everything. I'm just gonna show you the ones I use most of the time. So one of them is extra text. Extra text will just apply whatever you throw in here to the whole scene and render it. So this one is actually going to take more time um, to render because it's not stuff that would have been done otherwise. So I put a VRay dirt in here, and if I just grab a bit of this, render it, that's going to show up as another render layer when the prepass is done. If you want to do like a UV pass or a whatever pass, you can always drag whatever texture you want into this guy, and it will render it at render time into a render element, a render layer. But bear in mind that it will actually slow down your render, but of course not as much as having an extra render layer and stuff like that. So it's a really good way of doing it. And we're still we're not affecting our beauty, so that's all good. Another one that we'll want to use is the set depth. I'm just going to turn this guy off just because he's slow. You can turn these guys on and off per render layer, nice and quickly. So set depth goes from black to white, and 1000 is probably a little bit too far. So I'm just going to go with my instincts here. I think about 100 is good. You do not want to clamp your depth, and unless you're just using it for fog. If you actually want to use it for depth of field, turn off filtering, because filtering is just going to mess it all up. So let's see what we're getting out of this. I really should have scaled down that image, shouldn't I? Well, either way, set depth should be showing up here in a second. See, depending on the distance to the camera, it's going to get brighter and brighter and brighter. So that's useful for a lot of stuff, mainly depth of field, also stuff like desaturating your backgrounds. You'll want to get this out. It's so cheap to render that you can even do one that's filtered and one that's not, if you want to use it for depth of field and, say, a fog effect. But one thing I actually like to do is uncheck depth clamping and then set white to 1. That just means that if you read the pixel value, and that pixel value is 1, it's because something is 1 unit away from you. If it's 100, it's 100 units away from you, and it just makes a lot of sense. It won't show the image because it's just going to be all white, but it's going to make sense inside of your compositing package. So that's how I'd usually do it. And the very last one I want to show you is the multimatte. The multimatte is terrific. Let's just quickly jump into some of our materials here and add an attribute. It's called a material ID. Scroll all the way down, call this one 1. You should get one as well. All the way down, boom, 2, and might as well, oops, sorry, that wasn't the shader. Lambert 1. I'm just breaking everything now. Material ID. This doesn't have to be a VRay material, it'll go on pretty much anything. 3. And now if we jump back into a multimatte, you can see we set what's going to be red, what's going to be green, and what's going to be blue. We just set the material IDs. If you check this guy, you can set it on object IDs if you uncheck it. So if you have, say, a group of stuff that you want in one, want to create a matte for, you can create an object ID for them, or if you want to use shaders, you can use material IDs. And I think it goes up to like 255, so you can create plenty of these multimattes for whatever you need, and you can do some that are material IDs, some that are object IDs, and what have you not. So it's definitely the most elegant solution I've ever worked with for creating mattes for your renders. So let's see what happens if we go into that. See, now we get a beautiful RGB mat for our objects. And again, it takes memory, but hardly any computational time. So you are in a very good spot. I'd rather have too many of these than too few, but again, don't just throw stuff at your compositor. So it's really that simple, and I've never seen it that simple before. So use that, because it's brilliant. And actually, I wanted to do another video on this, but I'm going to show you inside of this one anyways. The last little one, I've said this before, is this light select. That's really cool as well. Has a few caveats, but let me just create two of these. You see how that creates a set at the same time? So you got your render element, but you also get a set. And the whole concept of this is that you middle mouse drag your lights into these light selects. You can have one or more lights in each of them. And when you hit render, it's going to split out the contribution from those lights. The issue with it though is that it's going to give you both diffuse, specular, well, diffuse and specular, I guess that's it, for each of the lights. So if you really want to be able to control everything, you'll need to create two of each light, have one that's diffuse, one that's specular, and create light selects for each of them, and it's going to be a little bit of a mess, but for a lot of stuff, it can be really useful. So you see, this is the light select from my HDR, and this is from the sphere light that was hanging right up here. But you can see it gets both of the diffuse lighting and the specs in there. So just bear that in mind when you when you do this stuff. But it is an awesome way of controlling, like you want to fine tune the temperature of each light or whatever inside of your compositing package. This is terrific. So with all that being said and done, that was a quick introduction to the render elements and why we love them. I'm going to get back to this at some point in the near future because there's a lot of stuff to cover. But this should get you started. So go ahead and sign up for the newsletter on renderschool.com or just keep an eye on it. I will try and get a lot of stuff out there as often as possible, and I hope you like what I'm putting out there. Otherwise, let me know if there's anything you want changed or covered or whatever. So I appreciate you watching, and take care.